of the Philosophemes podcast. Your host is Dr. Frank Scalambrino. Yeah, we're proud to be a part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Thank you for being here. Welcome. We do philosophy the traditional way. Yeah. Everyone is welcome on a Philosophemes podcast. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and it's so nice to see you all here. Can everybody hear me? Is it okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me on here, Dr. Corrington, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. I don't really have much to say about myself. We're experiencing an Arctic blast out here, so I'm a little frozen as well. But I've been spending pretty much all my time recently. I'm trying to not spend my time doing this, but I've been spending all my time recently thinking about posthumanism. So I just had to take a look at ecstatic naturalism in relation to posthumanism. And I think that the thesis of my talk is, I think it's the case that everyone would agree with it. I don't know. I'm excited to hear if Dr. Corrington agrees with it or not, but I think everyone would agree with it. This talk doesn't go into any sort of metaphysical heights or anything like that. I was just sort of contextualizing in relation to some of the things that I've been thinking about recently. And but I did think that maybe it would spark some conversation, and I'm game for that conversation if anybody wants to jump into that conversation. So, thank you. All right, so I've got a paper here to read, but it's not very long, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this to you, and then I can deviate from it as we go. All right, so I wanted to start by expressing my gratitude to Dr. Corrington and the entire Ecstatic Naturalism community for inviting me to present. I hope it's the case that my paper helps provoke some interesting ideas and conversations. I thought that it would be helpful to state this disclaimer, especially given some of the conversations that we might find ourselves in after the paper. So I just wanted to say that, I'm not a politician, and I'm not interested in how you vote, and I'm not interested in influencing your vote. I'm simply a scholar, and my connection to Nietzsche is methodological, and so I consider myself an experimenter. I guess I am providing a personal statement, Jonathan. So I strive to be a free thinker, and I strive to be willing to accept where the truth of inquiry leads me. I strive to bracket my prejudices and preconceived notions of the outcome of inquiry. And I've always resonated with the ancient skeptics and ancient skepticism, so I'll leave all of that out. All right. So that being said, I believe that there is a higher order logic that governs the relations between paradigms in philosophical systems of thought. And this higher order logic is already present in Plato's dialogues. This higher order logic is present all throughout the writings of Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, and Kant. This higher order logic, in my opinion, is even more solid than the principle of non-contradiction. That is to say, it's easier to circumvent the principle of non-contradiction than it is to circumvent this higher logic, in my opinion. And it is this higher order logic that is behind what I am calling the Humanism Spectrum. So these ideas aren't new, but to the best of my knowledge, no one's given this a name. I could not find a name for this. I've seen this logic implemented. I've seen this logic used in lots of different areas in philosophy, but again, I've just never seen it be given a name. So I named it the Humanism Spectrum because I thought that sounded, intuitive. And so, as you can see, if you got a chance to look at the outline and stuff, the humanism spectrum hinges on how the logic of the term human is understood. And I forgive me if this is not high level enough. I just thought that I should flesh this out. So, if human is understood to refer to an absolute category of being, And when I hear statements like that, I of course can't help but think about Aristotle and Kant, and some of this Kantian language will come in here in a moment. But if human is understood to refer to an absolute category of being, meaning that there are clear species-specific limits to being human or to being a human, if those limits are transgressed, then what you have is no longer human, right? So that's one way to understand human. Some thing's essence ultimately relates to its function, is how Aristotle nails this thing down. And so you can think about how a rock can be a paperweight, but 8 ounces of water cannot be a paperweight without a container. So that's the humanist position on the spectrum. And then in regard to the transhumanist category, the logic is no longer absolute. The logic is relative. In other words, human is understood to refer to a relative category of being. Thus, the limits of what it means to be human are not rigid, they are fluid. For example, because the function of giving birth can be offloaded, so to speak, then the extent to which some identity depends on the capacity to give birth, the function of giving birth, then the limits or boundaries around that identity may be seen as relative. Whereas transhumanism still sees the activity of procreation as a human activity, posthumanism does not. When we transition to the philosophical position of posthumanism, the natural process may be technologically replicated, rendering the process artificial and synthetic rather than natural. Philosophically, there is a huge rabbit hole here, and you could go so far as to say that posthumanism marks, in my opinion, the triumph of Cartesianism. Recall 2 principles infamously associated with Descartes. Descartes explicitly declared that the mechanical view of the universe could be mathematized. That's how we ended up with the Cartesian coordinate system. And he also explicitly declared that by way of his method, humans would be able to, quote unquote, conquer. That's exactly how he puts it, that humans would be able to conquer nature, that humans would be able to harness the power of nature. So thus, posthumanism from this angle represents a shift from seeing nature as something that can be understood in terms of math to seeing nature as just a material expression of math. If I could say that one more time, posthumanism represents a shift from seeing nature as something that can be understood in terms of math to seeing nature as just a material expression of math. It's really important to let that soak in. So if it is true that there is nothing inherently special about the human so-called natural way of reproducing humans, then the technological way of reproducing them isn't just as good, it's probably better because it's more efficient. Of course, it is inherently eugenics, but it's not the ugly kind of eugenics where we have to figure out what to do with adult human corpses. Rather, it's the kind of eugenics that technically is no different from selecting options on your vehicle at the car dealership. Again, I'm not advocating for any of these positions. I'm just cycling through, presenting them in their own light and from the point of view of the other positions. This is why so many philosophers were upset about the radio. They could see Pandora's box opening. Back when Walter Benjamin lived in Paris, healthcare consisted of people scooped up off the street by concerned citizens, like a scene out of the Keystone Cops, and being stuck in a hotel room. Now people believe it is their right to be kept alive as long as possible by governments and corporations, so much so that they cheer in the streets when someone is gunned down for participating in refusing health care. What is responsible for that change? Math. computation, mathematizing, processing, and implementing technological ways of intervening in those processes. For those of us interested in ecstatic naturalism and the mysteries of nature, the deep mysteries of nature naturing, how could we not ask the question whether technology will eliminate the mysteries of nature? And how could we not ask what else will be eliminated along with those mysteries? So I'll stick to the outline I provided before the talk, and maybe we can address these questions after the talk. However, I do want to mention that even as recent as 2020, I refused to believe that consciousness is the kind of activity that could be decoded. Now, I completely believe that machines can already real-time read human minds, but that they will continue to get better and better over time. There are countless examples of AI reading minds and BCIs, or brain-computer interfaces, like those produced by Neuralink. They will soon be a regular part of households. Soon you won't even need to speak to Alexa or Siri. You'll be able to just think it. Can you imagine triggering a Google search just by thinking that you'd like to Google something? Okay, so that's the humanism spectrum. And in what follows, keep in mind that I'm not merely presenting random ideas, but rather I'm looking at ideas that indicate points of incommensurability. In other words, either or points, places where you must select one category or another based on the idea in question, and where you cannot select both. That's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to sort of analyze these philosophical systems and how they relate to one another. Because then you have an anchor point, right? Everything flows from there. So where then is ecstatic naturalism on the spectrum? The points of incommensurability I identified, perhaps you can identify some more for us, are pretty straightforward. Ecstatic naturalism's understanding of the semiotic process of nature naturing contributes to its characterization as a transhuman philosophy, because it moves beyond traditional human-centric frameworks of identity, agency, and meaning. By decentering function and reinterpreting identity within broader ontological processes, ecstatic naturalism transcends anthropocentric paradigms while retaining a unique place for the human, for instance, within nature's semiotic and transformative dynamics. In this way, it is as if ecstatic naturalism situates humanity as one participant in a larger network of semiotic and ontological processes. To state this more technically, ecstatic naturalism's semiotic framework prioritizes relationality over functionality. Relationality over functionality. Entities are defined not by their roles or uses, but by their interconnectedness within the semiotic field of nature. As an example, we can envision, or to use my favorite Corrington phrase, we can get an envisioning awareness of how a river is not merely a source of water, but a relational entity that participates in the unfolding of nature's potencies, shaping and being shaped by its environment. This relational perspective supports a transhuman approach by emphasizing the fluid and evolving nature of identity. You can see this relational aspect with the environment. It rejects static function-based definitions in favor of dynamic semiotic participation. In this way, ecstatic naturalism understands spirit as more than anthropomorphic. Therefore, and I think that so much hinges on the understanding of spirit. So therefore, on the one hand, I would say that ecstatic naturalism is not a humanistic naturalism. It is not a humanism as much as it is a transhumanism. On the other hand, these same ontological commitments can be used to illustrate how ecstatic naturalism is not a post-human philosophy. This is because post-humanism is not interested in the fluidity of identity. Post-humanism sees identity as heuristic and more indicative of a current level of computational analysis than of any entity with sacred boundaries or a privileged identity. Thus, post-humanism would see ecstatic naturalism's commitment to guard spirit as sacred as a throwback to humanistic superstition. To defend ecstatic naturalism against this, we might say that spirit is indeed guarded as sacred, but this sacredness is grounded in nature's immanent and transformative processes rather than in supernatural or anthropocentric terms. While it seems as though technology can participate in semiotic processes, for example, by enabling new forms of communication or interaction, it does so within the broader semiotic field mediated by spirit. And though spirit is not static, substantial, or anthropomorphic, which would make it humanistic, it is also true that for ecstatic naturalism, spirit is not merely an emergent property of a technological or relational network. If you were following along with the outline, this actually brings us all the way to the question concerning technology. The section title is, of course, supposed to bring Heidegger to mind, just as Heidegger would critique the view of a river as standing reserve. Posthumanism goes beyond a view of the world as standing reserve and straight to a view of the world as input for computation.
The PC gave us computing power at home, the internet connected us, and mobile let us do it pretty much anywhere. Now generative AI lets us communicate with technology in our own language using our own senses. But figuring it all out when you're living through it is a totally different story. Welcome to Leading the Shift, a new podcast from Microsoft Azure. I'm your host, Susan Ettlinger. In each episode, leaders will share what they're learning to help you navigate all this change with confidence. Please join us. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Recently, I had a friend of mine on the podcast, and he used the example of the sun heating a rock. This particular friend of mine that I'm speaking of, he's a computational theorist, and I believe that he is very happy to be identified as a post-humanist. I don't know that I've ever actually had him admit that to me, but I think it's pretty clear he's a post-humanist. He used the example of the sun heating a rock during the day and the rock cooling at night. Whereas ecstatic naturalism sees this example in terms of nature's inherent semiotic processes, posthumanism sees this example as illustrating how the cosmos is actually a computational machine. I suppose we might boil this down then to meaning making versus computation. whereas meaning making is often nonlinear and open-ended, involving layers of interpretation that may not be reducible to strict rules or algorithms. That's meaning making. Computing is rooted in formal logic and algorithmic processes. It involves the manipulation of symbols or data according to predefined rules to produce predictable and replicable outcomes. It seems to me that in ecstatic naturalism, potencies are valued not for their utility to humans, but for their role in the continual unfolding of nature, which is a perspective that resists instrumentalization by situating humanity as a participant within rather than a master over nature's processes. Likewise, ecstatic naturalism would resist positioning post-humanity or post-human algorithms as master of nature's processes. In other words, ecstatic naturalism engages with human creativity and technological products, but does not prioritize technology as central to transformation or meaning making. Spirit and nature remain the primary agents regarding transcendence. In contrast, of course, posthumanism treats technology and artificial systems as key players in reshaping identity, agency, and evolution. It often positions technological mediation as transformative and integral to posthuman futures. Hence, in conclusion, then, that is why, given the humanism spectrum, I would locate ecstatic naturalism as a transhuman philosophy rather than either a humanistic or post-humanistic philosophy. But, again, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on all of this, and perhaps we can explore some of the specifics of transhumanism and how they relate to ecstatic naturalism together.
We hope you found this episode enjoyable and thought-provoking, yeah. Comments are welcome on YouTube. Woo! Until next time, stay wonderful.